The Miami Hurricanes opened up as big favorites against the Virginia Tech Hokies. Can the Canes keep up the same standard when the ACC schedule begins?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. It's a Victory Monday. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County on Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On this episode, I want to talk about some of the unsung heroes from the USF game because we mentioned in our recap on Sunday, we were probably leaving some guys out, right? I think we did leave some guys out we need to talk about. We have to get into what Miami has got to clean up because, yes, Miami has won 4 blowouts to start the season. They've been scoring in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in every game they've played so far, but they've left meat on the bone. It's been far from perfect. And if you want to achieve perfection this season, there are some issues Miami has to clean up. But let's talk about what the odds look like. Not only for the Virginia Tech game coming up, that line has opened up, but some of your full season odds. Okay. So yes, as mentioned at the top, Hurricanes have opened up against huge favorites at home against the Hokies for this Friday night. I was not expecting the line to be this big. Miami opened up at minus 17-point favorites. I'm now looking at 17.5 on our official sportsbook FanDuel. So that's actually a bigger spread than what Miami had on the road at the South Florida Bulls this past weekend. Of course, Miami covered comfortably. They've covered the spread I'm not sure about the FAMU game. I can't remember what the spread was, but I think they've covered the spread in every game they've played so far. And the Virginia Tech Hokies, that's a talented football team. They've played nowhere near their talent level so far this year. I mean, we can nitpick certain things about Miami. We have and we will. But as far as Virginia Tech goes, they returned a higher percentage of last year's production than any other team in the ACC, and I think second most in the country. But they're not living up to that. Their defense has been 11th in the conference so far out of 17. Their quarterback, who I'm a big fan of, Kyron Drones, has not been consistent to start the year. He's really only been good in like fourth quarters this season. They already have losses to Vanderbilt. They just lost to Rutgers this past weekend. Drones had no touchdowns and an interception in that game. I believe Virginia Tech is on paper better than what they put out there so far, but I can understand why Miami is favored heading into this game, and it's going to be a night game at home. The Hurricanes are also, by the way, as they have been for the past couple of weeks, favored to win the ACC championship with plus 125 odds there. Clemson is next at plus 300. The Hurricanes now have, for what it's worth, the 8th best odds to win a national championship at plus 1,800. They're behind in this order: Ohio State at number 1, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Oregon, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. Those are the 7 teams in front of Miami in the championship odds. Miami's odds of reaching the college football playoff, just getting in the dance, are actually minus 180. So you'd have to bet $180 to win 100 on that. So the odds makers right now, and this is actually kind of a scary feeling because I'm very superstitious, to see Miami, they give them a better chance than not to actually get into the college football playoffs. But it's an interesting trend right now. And yes, Cam Ward, who entered the USF game as the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, not only did he not hurt his stock against USF, he raised his stock against the Bulls, throwing for 404 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and an interception that really wasn't his fault. Ward is now plus 350 to win the Heisman Trophy. He's in front of Jackson Dart, who's got plus 500 odds. So those FanDuel numbers, they tell some interesting stories for your Miami Hurricanes, who are 4-0, ranked number 7 now in the country. They moved up a spot in the AP rankings, but the Hurricanes have ACC games on the schedule the rest of the way. Now, based on the way the rest of the ACC has been performing, Florida State finally just got their first win of the season. You have them later on. Cal has looked really good at times. They've been up and down. Virginia Tech, who you play this week, has not looked as good as I expected them to look. Although Louisville, who Miami plays on the road later on in less than a month from now in October, they've actually looked a little bit better than expected. They've been really good, but you could definitely make an argument that Miami will probably or could probably be favorites heading into all the remaining games on the schedule. But as we've seen, though, in recent years, there's something about some of these ACC matchups that bring out the worst in the Hurricanes. Is this year different? I believe it is. I believe it can be, because I look at the leadership. I look at how special Cam Ward is, by the way. We haven't had one that special in a very, very long time for the Hurricanes. I think the DNA of this team can be different, and they won't fall into some of the traps that previous teams have, but they're going to have to prove it to us starting off of a short week this Friday night. Of course, it's a short week for Virginia Tech as well. They played on Saturday. And if it's a short week, I'd rather be the home team than the road team. So I think that does favor Miami just a little bit. Now, let's talk about some of the things that Mario Cristobal had to say this morning on his weekly spot on the Joe Rose Show, because he did address a couple of the injuries. Now, heading into that USF game, we thought Jalen Rivers would be back, Miami's starting left tackle, because Cristobal essentially confirmed during the week that Rivers was going to be back this week. That turned out not to be the case. As far as Rueben Bain Jr., we weren't given any assurances on Bain heading into last week. Hopefully it's different this week. So Cristobal was asked about Rivers and Bain by Joe Rose this morning, and he said for both of them, they are right there, man. It's really, really close. People are like, same stuff. We're right there with them. They look great. They're coming around great, doing great things at practice. There's a great chance we'll see them on Friday. And listen, if you really have been, just as I suspect is the case, just being really cautious with their recoveries and just like making sure you don't rush them back too quick. I'm not sure what the issue is with Jalen Rivers. I don't know if that's ever been disclosed, and it's none of my business. With Rueben Bain, it was reported as a calf injury early in the Florida game. But if we're believing that it's not anything serious with both of them and we're being cautious, this Friday would be a good time to break them out, right? Starting ACC play against, and I can't sit here and tell you that Virginia Tech will necessarily be a bigger challenge than South Florida. Maybe if they play to their talent level that they haven't done this year, they can be, but this would still be a very good game. If Bain and Rivers are ready to go, this would be a good game to dust them off and get them out there. Cristobal commented on Jordan Lyle's 91-yard touchdown run, which, as we talked about this yesterday in our recap, that was the longest run from scrimmage in Miami Hurricanes program history. 91 yards, Jordan Lyle. And Cristobal said Jordan, with his run, didn't surprise anybody because he's been doing that in camp and throughout practice. He said, this guy has an elite future ahead of him, is an elite presence. And we can agree. And Locked On Canes listeners have known that for several months, because you remember when the Truth Teller and I were joined months ago by Donnie Solinger, Miami Hurricanes, a legendary former running backs coach. He had spent a lot of time with Lyle when Lyle was in high school, and he said, watch out, this kid is the real deal. And so far, Lyle he scored touchdowns in 3 consecutive games, and that 91-yarder is one that goes into the history books for Miami. So you love that. Now, I was really glad, and we'll talk about this on the other side, and I'm also going to answer some of you guys' questions here on Locked On Canes, because the Locked On Insiders have been busy today. We are going to talk about what Miami has to improve, and I think that's pretty obvious, right? 8 penalties against FAMU, 8 penalties against Ball State, 11 penalties against USF this past weekend. That's obviously something these Canes have to improve. We're going to talk about it because, for example, in the USF game, you had, those referees, by the way, they only made the problem worse because they just felt like throwing flags on both sides, because USF also had 11 penalties, but still it was too much for Miami. 113 yards in penalties, literally an entire football field plus worth of penalty yardage. You've got to clean that up heading into the ACC schedule. Guys, we have so much to get to. Talking about unsung heroes as well on this team. Guys, we're only getting started on this brand new episode. We're live, by the way, right now on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching us on Locked On Canes YouTube, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. If you're listening to the audio version, which I highly recommend, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And We will continue on this loaded episode of Locked On Canes. You want to keep it locked. And I already know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Folks, we've been winning money, having an awesome time. And yeah, the FanDuel odds for Miami this weekend, 17.5-point favorites against Virginia Tech. But if you're bullish on a Miami team that's been covering the spread on a regular basis, if you're bullish on Miami, you can lock in Hurricanes minus 17.5 at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. I co-host that show with Kenton Gibbs, who's so entertaining, from Locked On Wolfpack. We talk about the conference. There were some surprising results this past weekend, like North Carolina. North Carolina gave up 70 points at home to James Madison. What was that? There was so much interesting stuff. And, Kenton's Wolfpack, unfortunately for him, got blown out by Clemson. So you can catch a lot of great conversations we've been having on Locked On ACC. Much like this show, it's available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. This is something else that Cristobal talked about this after the USF game. I was really happy to see Miami have to overcome some adversity in that USF game. I think that there were teachable moments. There were lessons learned. You saw what looked like a completely different team after halftime in that game. Because listen, when you're talking about overcoming adversity, if you have the ambitions of potentially winning the ACC, where you'd probably have to get through a Clemson or maybe have to play Louisville twice to win the ACC this year, you're going to have to be conditioned to overcome adversity, because not every game is going to be as easy as the 4 that you've played in so far. So Miami doesn't play an SEC schedule. Many of their opponents in the ACC this year aren't looking great this far. So being tested with adversity, as much as we can see, you get to see what this team is made of. And so far, I like it. So when Miami trailed against USF in the first half, that was their first deficit of the season so far. And honestly, guys, it would have been a different football game, I believe, or at least a different first half, because Miami ended up blowing them out. But if that interception hadn't happened, and Jacoby George has played very well so far this year, so I don't want to single him out so much, but that play was on him. If he'd held on to that football for a first down or possibly a touchdown instead of bobbling it for an interception, I think it's a completely different football game. I don't think it would have ever been close if that play had been converted, because that created a 14-point swing. That was the only touchdown drive was a short field that USF was able to put together, but Miami responded from that. Miami also had to deal with the unique challenge of an opponent that runs tempo you're not going to see again this season. You're not going to see another opponent run tempo the way that USF did. Miami had to deal with it, take some lumps in the first half. Thankfully, they forced a lot of field goal tries in the first half. They adapted, looked great in the second half. And, even Cam Ward, he looked a little off at times in the second quarter mainly, but he finished the game nearly perfect in the second half. Mario Cristobal said about his team in the post-game presser that the most important thing about his Hurricanes are, quote, these guys love to work. He added they are restless because they want to get better. So he mentioned they enjoy the work aspect of it. So once they've had their film session on, the things that didn't go so well in that USF game, these guys are apparently, and I've seen it based on the players that I've spoken to and the practices I've been able to watch, this does seem like a team that is eager out there. They don't drink their own Kool-Aid. They're not going to be like, oh, that was so great. They celebrate the win for probably a couple of hours. They move on to the next opponent, and they move on to what they need to get better. I think that's the phase Miami is already in on a short week heading into this Virginia Tech game. All right, here's some players that I think deserve more love. I had a chance to review the game from Saturday. I've also had a chance to take a look at the Pro Football Focus numbers. And again, Pro Football Focus is not the gospel, but it's a great tool that we as media and fans have to examine the snap counts, to examine the grades that they give. I don't always agree with the grades, but PFF is a great tool to examining the game after the fact. And Akheem Mesidor deserves a lot more love. Now, we gave him a lot of love preseason, maybe not enough love since the season has began. He earned Miami's highest Pro Football Focus grade on Saturday with an elite 90.5. He recorded a sack and a tackle for loss in the game. He graded out specifically really well against the run at an excellent 82.5 on PFF. And by the way, give Miami some credit, because heading into that USF game, all that we were talking about was how dangerous that team is on the ground, right? 285 yards rushing per game, 8th in the country on the rush. They did actually, damage Miami with their passing game a little bit, but Miami shut USF's running game down. They were very disciplined, did a very good job, and Akheem Mesidor was right there with that. A lot of people have put this one in the chat, and I agree. Got to give more love, and I think we have since the Ball State game, to A.J. Allen. And A.J., his stats weren't that flashy in the USF game, but he continues to run hard. He's shifty. He's a good weapon catching passes out of the backfield. And there was one particular play on, I think it was a 3rd and short, where he literally just like with sheer will was able to charge the extra yard he needed to get the first down. And he's got a great first step out of the backfield. So A.J. Allen is someone who deserves more love. Going back to the defense, I liked what I saw from Raul Popo Aguirre. He played 15 snaps in the game at linebacker. He graded out well at an 81.7 PFF grade. Anything over 70 is considered good. 80, really good. Over 90, elite, that sort of thing. So that was a good performance from him. Also, I give a lot of credit to Markel Bell, he's had big shoes to fill. He's had to fill in for Jalen Rivers the past 3 weeks, and Bell has done an admirable job. This is how you develop O-line depth. And listen, I know that that Bell and actually not just Bell, certain members of Miami's offensive line are not excelling as much as expected in the run blocking grades, but the pass protection has been phenomenal. Didn't give up a sack against USF. Now, it also helps that Cam Ward is like a magician with the way he eludes pressure, but the pressure was minimal. The offensive line is doing a fantastic job, and I really appreciate the way Markel Bell has stepped up. Mario Cristobal also mentioned the pancake honcho, Samson Okunlola, who played a handful of snaps in the game at left tackle, so he got some work in as well. This is how you develop O-line depth. A couple of other guys on the defense that I want to shout out. We already knew that Mish Powell is playing well. That's not necessarily an unsung hero, but he gets another interception on Saturday, his second of the year. And something that stands out to me about Powell when I was going through the Pro Football Focus grades and the snap counts, this dude played 76 snaps on Saturday. 76 snaps, leading the entire team. Jaden Harris wasn't far behind. He's also playing really well. Harris has been one of the most improved players this season. He played 73 snaps. So speaking of most improved players this season, Jaden Harris is definitely on that list. Isaiah Horton, my God, this is no longer a secret. He had 8 catches for 108 yards, a touchdown, nearly had 2 touchdowns in the game. Horton is Miami's top receiver, most targeted receiver this past weekend against USF. He played phenomenal. He had been playing very well. In fact, as we've talked about, Isaiah Horton, he's had this bad luck where every time the dude catches a touchdown, half the times he had another one that was called back because they thought he was down at the half-yard line. He had 2 touchdowns early in the year where teammates of his committed penalties, so they were called back. He finally got one that counted on Saturday. Isaiah Horton has been one of the most improved players on the team. And, something else that sticks out about the Pro Football Focus grades for Miami, they indicate that Miami's inconsistencies in running the football actually have more to do with the run blocking than the running backs. So we'll see how much of an impact that Jalen Rivers can have when he makes his return this week. But, for those wondering, the grades, everyone's how come, Fletcher and Martinez aren't picking up more chunk plays? It's usually in the second halves of games when it gets to A.J. Allen time and Jordan Lyle time, when they usually pick up the chunk plays. Now, teams have been loading up the box early in games against Miami, but also the grades would indicate Miami's running backs are getting higher grades than the offensive linemen are in run blocking. So that's something to note for the rest of the year. And maybe this answers the question that we got from Steve in Port Orange, who says, I would like to hear your thoughts on the run game. especially Damian Martinez. He's such a powerful running back, but something is not clicking with him yet. What is it? Well, Martinez, we got to give him credit for scoring 3 touchdowns, short yardage, but 3 touchdowns scored. He also caught the 2-point conversion that Miami converted. So listen, like if you were playing like a college football fantasy, you got a lot of points with Damian Martinez. Also, I didn't see him doing the dances and the stutter steps. I saw him, hitting the hole with more decisiveness this past Saturday. So I think Martinez is going to be fine. And I go back to something that Amon Richards, former Miami Hurricanes receiver, told me on the live show that we do on Wednesdays with Gio Million. Amon told me, like, oftentimes it's going to take a few weeks for the running game to really settle in. And a lot of times the defenses, for whatever reason, are giving Miami more in the passing game, and Cam Ward is more than happy to take advantage. If you want to invite Cam Ward to slice and dice you down the field, he's already got 1,400 plus yards and 14 touchdowns this year. Ward will be more than happy to oblige that. All right, folks, we got a lot more to get to, including questions and comments from the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. If you want to become a Locked On Canes Insider, click the link in the show description below. I include the link. You can sign up and try it free for 14 days. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We do one-on-one questions and answers there. I give you guys show updates, breaking news, recruiting scoops. And folks, we are only getting started because we have to talk about cutting down on those penalties. How does Miami cut down on the penalties? Mario Cristobal did give an answer to that question. We will talk about it right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Keep it locked. Folks, and I know you're keeping it locked to GameTime. This is the only ticket app that I use because I know I'm getting incredible prices, especially last minute. I'm looking at prices in the $35 range for Miami against Virginia Tech this Friday. You want to take advantage of that? Come support your team in prime time. Guys, download the GameTime app. They've got a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. GameTime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to get this game time. Folks, I love the views you get from your seat. Panoramic views right there in the app before you buy. Make sure you turn on the all-in pricing feature, and they're going to show you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. That's a great tool. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use my code, LOCKEDONCollege, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Be like our guy, oh snap, it's Mikey, and hit that like button. Smash that like button and subscribe to Locked On Canes on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your audio podcasts. We're all over. We're on every podcasting app, I think. We're on Amazon Music. You can find Locked On Canes pretty much everywhere. All right, we get this one from Alex, my namesake, who says, anyone else notice how our defensive line was staying in their lanes while pass rushing to make sure the USF quarterback didn't burn them? Yes, I noticed that a lot more when I watched the game for a second time. You could tell Miami was very well prepared to slow down the run. Now, as a result of that, Byron Brown, and with that tempo, they were able to have success in the first half in the passing game, but Miami adjusted to their tempo, and Miami basically completely negated the USF offense in the second half. But yeah, Alex, it was clear. Miami was prepared for USF's 8th-ranked rushing attack, and it showed, and I'm happy. And the first half was obviously far from perfect, and I'm sure Lance Guidry and Mario Cristobal had a lot to say to their defensive players at halftime, but they responded and they adapted, they adjusted. I love it. We get one from El Cuban Kane, who says, do you think conditioning is something that after USF, Mario and staff need to work on to ensure teams don't exploit us when running the hurry-up offense? A couple of things. When it comes to pure conditioning, Miami was a lot fresher in the fourth quarter than USF. USF was dead in the fourth quarter, and Miami looked like it was the fourth quarter all over again. So I don't know if it was like a big picture conditioning issue. I just think what happened, Miami's defense got stretched in that first half. And when you aren't adapting and you don't have time to make substitutions, I think that they looked obviously tired, and your conditioning can always be better. Believe me, I don't think Mario Cristobal and Coach Feld are like, yeah, guys, our work here is done. Conditioning is perfect. Nothing like that. But Miami was fresh in the second half of that game. I just think USF did a really good job just keeping Miami from being able to make subs. And also, here's the thing. It's like you're going to face other challenges throughout the year, but you're not going to face this same challenge again because, to my knowledge, nobody else on Miami's schedule this season runs their offense at the type of tempo that USF does. So you're going to have different challenges. You're not going to have that same challenge. We get a question from Canes Hunter 69 who says, have you or any inside reporters heard how Mario is or will be dealing with these penalties? Because in one game, this is going to catch up to us and make what could be a great season into a what could have been. Okay, so here's what, and this is not an inside report. If you watched Mario's post-game presser after USF, you saw him and heard him say this, but Mario, he said he literally told the team at halftime after 8 penalties in the first half to, quote, stop all the BS. Now, he didn't, I censored it. He didn't, right? He told them to stop all the BS. And he said, that's the bottom line. We were anxious. We got off of what we are, he said. Basically implying the team was just too amped up and not playing with enough control. But then he says he was proud of the team for putting their words into action in the second half. But yeah, I'm sure that's a conversation they're having a lot, right? About how to keep the emotions down. Because you walk a fine line, Canes Hunter. You walk a fine line between trying to play with enough anger and aggression in a very violent sport versus playing with too much of that anger and aggression to when things are happening after plays, or if you're a cornerback and you're grabbing a receiver while the ball's in the air, you're getting penalized for that. It's like you walk a very fine line with playing with anger and aggression, but not playing with too much of that. It's got to be controlled anger and controlled aggression. So it's obviously going to be something that Miami is going to keep harping on all season long, to cut out the BS, to not having that, because it didn't cost you against USF. Something like that could cost you against Louisville. You can't beat yourself against that team. Like, I was watching Georgia Tech against Louisville this past Saturday. Like, credit to Louisville. They played well. They won the game 31-19, but Georgia Tech, they had that ridiculous, they didn't commit enough to a pass interference penalty. The receiver still caught the ball and scored a touchdown. Louisville scored a special teams touchdown, a defensive touchdown. Georgia Tech failed to convert a 4th and goal from the 2. Like, they self-inflicted wounds were a big reason why the Hokies, or not the Georgia Tech, the Yellow Jackets. That was a big reason why the Yellow Jackets lost that game to Louisville. Miami can't, you can't have self-inflicted wounds. I circle Louisville because that appears to be the toughest game remaining on the schedule. So you cannot beat yourselves against a team like that. If you commit 11 penalties for 113 yards, you may not be able to win that game in a blowout like you just did against USF. We get this one from Miami 06. His name is Mike. He says, hey, I know that we're Miami Hurricanes channel, but could you maybe mention the passing of Mercury Morris? Yes. Obviously I'm a Canes lifer. I'm also a Miami Dolphins lifer. And I wasn't here to watch the 72 perfect season, but I feel like I was there because I've watched so much game film and so many documentaries. I read a book about the 72 season, and Mercury Morris, he is an NFL legend, but more specifically, I would say Merc is or was really the face of that 72 team, or at least the spokesman of it. I mean, Larry Zonka is the guy who gets most of the accolades because what a tremendous player he was. Mercury Morris was also a great player, but Mercury really has been sort of the spokesman of that team, and he even cut that commercial, when the Patriots almost went undefeated, and he talked about, hey, now they're on our block, they're on our street. So sad. He was 77 years old. God rest his soul, and God bless his family, because you hate to lose a legend. And we just lost Mercury Morris, who is one of the more iconic players to ever put on the Miami Dolphins aqua and orange. He will be missed. We get this one from Tampa Lou, who says, hey, going up against top competition like UGA or Alabama, do we have elite speed on the outside to make the big time plays? He says, is Sam Brown our fastest receiver that gets significant playing time? To answer that question, yes. I think Brown is probably the fastest regular receiver. He says, I feel that we have that at running back, but not at receiver. Also playing at Raymond James Stadium. That was a Miami home game, he says. I went to the game and fans showed up and showed out. Thank you, Tampa Lou. I still like overall, I think Miami is getting close. I don't think that Miami has the depth level of a Georgia or an Ohio State. Like you're just behind compared to their builds because, Kirby Smart has been doing that for over a decade, just stacking talent upon talent. Miami's been doing that for about the past 3 years. So I think there's a difference level in the depth. In terms of the pure speed, if you were in a game like that, the most important thing is to try to compete at the line of scrimmage. That's the most important thing. But in terms of game-breaking speed, we're seeing some of it from Sam Brown. We've seen some of it from Chris Johnson. We have seen it as well from Jacoby George. But you know what? I don't want to think too much about, because you wouldn't see one of those teams until the playoff. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? Miami still has 8 more ACC games before we could even think about facing a team like that in the college football playoff. Oh man, we got, let me see. We get this one from Will 304 to 305, who says, will USF be the toughest team that Miami plays? Miami played until the Louisville game. Maybe. I'm not sleeping on Cal. I know Cal, they didn't play great against Florida State. They only scored 9 points at Doak. Florida State's defensive line seems to be waking up a little bit. Their offense is still not good, Florida State, but Cal is going to be tough. And they played at Doak Campbell Stadium. Miami has to fly out there. Their defense has been playing well. Cal, their quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, South Florida native, has been playing well. Jaden Ott has had ups and downs. He's been banged up this year, but he's super explosive. I'm not sleeping on Cal before the Louisville game. Not sleeping on them. All right, folks. Once again, I left a lot of unanswered questions. We're going to revisit some of those later this week. My apologies if I didn't get to your question today. Also, I'm going to be writing a mailbag column midweek for Canes County at Rivals. And so I'm going to try to answer some questions in the mailbag that I didn't answer on this episode. And I will try to answer more questions on a later episode this week. So make sure you hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to Locked On Canes on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we will talk to you guys again next time. It's ACC the rest of the way, Virginia Tech week. Can Miami live up to their 17.5-point favorite status? We will find out, and we'll talk about it all week right here on Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.